I freeze at the doorway. The room smells like lavender and old paper. Sunlight cuts through the curtains, landing on dozens of framed photos covering the walls. Every single photo is of me. Not normal photos, hidden ones. Me sleeping on the couch. Me crying in the backyard after Dad yelled at me. Me standing outside my high school with my ex-boyfriend. My chest tightens. What the hell? Then I notice the notebooks stacked neatly beside the bed. Each one has a year written on it, 201820192020. My hands shake as I open one. Inside are pages and pages about me. What I eat. Who I talk to. What time I come home. And one sentence, circled in red ink, stops my breathing cold. She's starting to remember what happened that night. A floorboard creaks behind me. I slowly turn around. And my stepmother is standing in the doorway smiling at me. My name is Madison Reyes. I'm 22 years old, and I'm telling this because some family secrets are dangerous enough to destroy an entire life. I grew up in a small town outside Nashville with my dad and stepmother, Celeste. People loved Celeste. She baked cookies for neighbors, volunteered at church, and always smiled too hard when guests visited. Everyone called her an angel. But inside our house, things felt different. Cold. Controlled. Ever since I was little, there was one room upstairs nobody used. Dad called it storage. But that made no sense because Celeste cleaned it every morning. I'd hear the vacuum running, smell fresh flowers outside the door. Sometimes she'd even lock it afterward. Whenever I asked about it, her whole face changed. Stay away from that room, Madison. Not angry. Scared. Dad never talked about it either. Honestly, Dad barely talked at all anymore. He used to laugh and play guitar in the kitchen, but over the years he became quiet, nervous. Like he was walking around landmines. The older I got, the stranger things became. Celeste always wanted to know where I was. Who I texted. Who I dated. One time, I came home from a party in downtown Nashville, and she already knew I'd left early after arguing with my boyfriend. She wasn't even there. I remember staring at her across the dinner table. How did you know that? She smiled while cutting her chicken. A mother notices things. But she wasn't my mother. My real mom disappeared when I was 7. That's what Dad always told me. She left one night, he'd say quietly. Didn't want this life anymore. I hated my mom for years because of that. What kind of woman abandons her kid? But standing inside that secret room, staring at photos of myself covering the walls, I suddenly felt sick. Because none of this looked normal. Celeste stepped into the room slowly, still smiling. You shouldn't be in here. I held up the notebook. What is this? Her eyes locked onto the page in my hand. For the first time in my life, I saw panic on her face. She rushed toward me, but I backed away. No, I shouted. Tell me what this is. Dad suddenly appeared behind her at the top of the stairs. And he looked terrified. Not angry. Terrified. Celeste turned toward him sharply. You left the door unlocked. Dad's hands trembled. She deserves to know. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush the house. Then Celeste laughed softly. A weird, shaky laugh. Oh, she whispered, so we're finally doing this. I looked between them. Doing what? Dad couldn't even look at me. Celeste walked to the bed and sat down calmly like this conversation had been waiting years to happen. Then she said the words that shattered my entire world. Your mother didn't leave you, Madison. I stopped breathing. What? Celeste folded her hands neatly in her lap. She tried taking you away from this family, and things got complicated. Dad suddenly snapped. Stop. But Celeste ignored him. She was unstable, she continued. Your father made a choice to protect you. Protect me. My heart pounded harder. What choice? Nobody answered. And that silence told me everything. Something horrible had happened in this house. Something they buried years ago. And somehow, I was connected to it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the notebooks in my head. She's starting to remember what happened that night. What night? I barely remembered anything from childhood after age 7. Just random flashes. Rain against windows. Someone screaming. A red suitcase near the stairs. At 2 a.m., I quietly walked downstairs for water. That's when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Celeste and Dad. Arguing. She knows too much now, Celeste hissed. Dad sounded exhausted. We should have told her years ago. You promised me. And you promised this obsession would stop. I froze outside the doorway. Obsession. Then Celeste said something that made my stomach drop. If Madison starts digging, she'll find Evelyn. Evelyn. My mother's name. Dad went silent. And in that moment, I realized the truth. My mother wasn't gone. She was still out there somewhere. And my family had lied to me my entire life. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done being the confused little girl in their story. If they wanted secrets, fine. I'd learn every single one of them. And when I uncovered the truth, I'd make them regret hiding it from me. The next morning, I acted normal. That was the hardest part. I sat at the kitchen table pretending to scroll on my phone while Celeste poured coffee like nothing had happened. Dad looked half dead beside her, staring into space. Nobody mentioned the room upstairs. Nobody mentioned my mother. But the tension in that kitchen felt sharp enough to cut skin. Celeste slid pancakes onto my plate and smiled too brightly. You seem quiet today. I forced a shrug, just tired. Her eyes stayed on me for a second too long. Like she was trying to read my thoughts. I smiled back anyway. Inside, I was already planning. The moment they left the house, I grabbed the notebooks from the secret room and locked myself in my bedroom. There were 12 of them. 12 years of notes about me. At first, the entries sounded creepy but harmless. Madison skipped lunch again. Madison cried after school. Madison still asks about Evelyn sometimes. But then the entries became darker. Had another nightmare about the stairs. She almost remembered during the thunderstorm. Must keep her away from old records. Old records. I kept flipping pages faster. Then I found an address, written repeatedly near the back of one notebook. A town in Lexington. Beside it were 2 words, circled over and over. Greenview Clinic. I immediately searched it online. Closed 8 years ago. Former psychiatric treatment center. My stomach twisted. Why would Celeste care about some abandoned clinic? And why was my mother's name written beside it? Before I could think too hard, my best friend Tessa called me. Tessa Brooks had been my ride or die since middle school. Loud, fearless, impossible to scare. The second she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. Okay, she said, what happened? An hour later, we were sitting inside her beat-up Jeep outside a gas station while I told her everything. The room. The notebooks. My mother. Tessa stared at me like she just opened a true crime documentary. That's insane. I know. No, she whispered. Madison, that's actually insane. I rubbed my temples. I need answers. Tessa leaned back in her seat, thinking. Then she said, so let's go get them. 2 days later, we drove to Lexington. The whole trip felt unreal. Rain slammed against the windshield, while my mind kept replaying childhood flashes I never understood before. A woman yelling my name. Dad dragging me through a hallway. Celeste standing near the stairs wearing white gloves. I suddenly felt sick. What if I remember something bad? I asked quietly. Tessa glanced at me. Then at least it'll finally be the truth. By evening, we reached the abandoned clinic. Greenview sat at the edge of town, surrounded by dead trees and rusted fences. Half the windows were broken. It looked haunted. This place is horrifying, Tessa muttered. We slipped through a damaged side gate and entered the building using our phone flashlights. Dust covered everything. Old wheelchairs. Rotting papers. Broken doors hanging sideways. Then I noticed something strange. One room near the back looked cleaner. Recently cleaner. Like someone still came here. My pulse sped up. I stepped inside slowly. And froze. On the desk sat a recent photograph of me walking outside my apartment. Notebooks identical to Celeste's lined the shelves. And taped to the wall was one sentence written in giant black letters. She was never supposed to remember. Then a voice behind us said, "You girls really should have stayed home," Tessa screamed. I spun around so fast, I almost slipped on the dusty floor. A man stood in the doorway holding a flashlight low against his leg. Tall, gray hoodie, baseball cap pulled over his eyes. For one terrifying second, I thought Celeste had sent someone after me. Then the man stepped closer, and my entire body went cold. "Dad." He looked exhausted. Rain soaked his jacket, and dark circles hung under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. Tessa grabbed my arm. "Why is he here?" Dad ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on me. "You weren't supposed to find this place." I backed away from him. "You lied to me my whole life." His face cracked with guilt. "I was trying to protect you." "There it is," I snapped. "That stupid excuse again." Dad rubbed both hands over his face, like he was falling apart in real time. "You don't understand Celeste." "Then explain her," I shouted. "Explain the notebooks, explain why she's spying on me." He looked toward the hallway nervously, before lowering his voice. "She thinks she saved this family." The clinic suddenly felt even colder. Dad sat heavily in a rusted chair and motioned for us to close the door. Then he finally told me the truth. 15 years ago, my mother Evelyn tried leaving him. Not because she was unstable. Because she was scared. According to Dad, Celeste had already become obsessed with our family long before marrying him. She worked beside my mother at a dental office in Nashville and slowly inserted herself into our lives. "She copied your mom," Dad whispered. "Her clothes, her haircut, everything." When my parents started having problems, Celeste made herself the helpful friend. Then things spiraled. Dad admitted he started secretly seeing Celeste while still married. But when my mother discovered the affair, she threatened to expose everything and take me away. That night, Dad paused shakily. There was a fight. The flashes in my head suddenly came faster. Rain. Shouting. A suitcase. "She tried leaving with you," he continued. "Celeste showed up at the house. Things got physical near the staircase." I stared at him. What happened to my mother? Dad's silence answered before his mouth did. My chest tightened painfully. "No. She survived," he said quickly. "But after the accident, she disappeared before police arrived." I blinked at him. "What?" "We searched for months," Dad whispered. "Nothing." Tessa crossed her arms. "So you just told Madison her mom abandoned her?" Dad looked ashamed. "Celeste convinced me it was better than the truth." I felt rage boiling inside me. Not just at Celeste. At him. At both of them. Years of lies. Years of manipulation. Years of making me hate a woman who might have been trying to protect me. Then another thought hit me. Why keep watching me? Dad looked terrified again. Because Celeste thinks your memories returning will destroy her life. Almost on cue, headlights suddenly flashed through the clinic windows. Dad stood immediately. "Oh no." Tires screeched outside. Car door slammed. And then I heard her voice echo through the hallway. "Madison." Sweet, calm, almost cheerful. Like none of this was insane. Dad whispered urgently, "You need to leave, now." But it was too late. Footsteps clicked closer through the darkness. Then Celeste appeared in the doorway wearing a long beige coat, rain dripping from her hair. She smiled at me softly. And in her hand was one of my childhood stuffed animals. "I kept this all these years," she said gently. Tessa whispered, "She's terrifying." Celeste ignored her completely. Her eyes stayed, locked onto mine as she stepped into the room. "You were never supposed to come here, sweetheart." Then she pulled a small recorder from her pocket, pressed play. And my missing mother's voice filled the room. The second I heard my mother's voice, my knees almost gave out. "Madison, if you ever hear this." The recording crackled softly. "I'm sorry." The room went dead silent, except for the rain outside. Dad looked frozen. Tessa stared at Celeste like she was witnessing a ghost story. But Celeste, she looked calm, almost proud. I stepped closer slowly, unable to breathe properly. "That's her," I whispered. Celeste nodded once. "Yes." My mother's voice continued through the recorder. "If anything happens to me, none of this is your fault." I covered my mouth. Every memory buried in my head started crashing back at once. The storm that night. My mother grabbing my hand near the staircase. Celeste screaming. Dad trying to separate them. Then, the fall. I remembered my mother lying motionless near the bottom of the stairs while Celeste stood above her shaking. Not smiling. Not evil. Terrified. The recorder clicked off. I looked at Celeste with tears burning in my eyes. You told me she abandoned me. Celeste's composure finally cracked. I thought she was gone, she snapped. After that night, she disappeared. You still lied. She would have taken everything from me. Dad suddenly exploded. You destroyed this family yourself. The words echoed through the clinic halls. Celeste looked stunned. Dad stepped forward, years of guilt pouring out of him all at once. You manipulated all of us. You made Madison hate her own mother. You turned this house into a prison. Celeste's eyes filled with panic. No, she whispered. I protected this family. You controlled it, he fired back. For the first time in my life, I saw Celeste lose control completely. Her breathing became uneven. Her hands trembled around the recorder. Then she looked directly at me. You have no idea how much I sacrificed for you. I laughed bitterly through tears. You documented my life like I was some experiment. I was making sure you were safe. You were making sure I stayed confused. The truth hit her hard because she suddenly went quiet. Really quiet. Then she sat slowly in the dusty chair beside the desk, staring at the floor. Small. Broken. Not powerful anymore. Just pathetic. Police arrived 20 minutes later after Tessa secretly called them from the hallway. Dad admitted everything. The lies. The cover-up. The fake story about my mother leaving. Investigators reopened the old case that same week. And 3 months later, they found her. Alive. Living quietly in Boise under a different name. When I first saw my mother again, neither of us spoke. We just stared at each other across a coffee shop table while both trying not to cry. She looked older than I imagined. Tired too. But when she smiled at me, something inside me finally settled for the first time in years. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. And I believed her. Dad eventually moved out of the old house in Nashville. He writes me letters sometimes. I answer occasionally. As for Celeste, last I heard, she lives alone now. No more perfect neighborhood image. No more pretending. And that room upstairs. I made sure it stayed empty before we sold the house. No photos. No notebooks. No secrets. Sometimes I still think about that first moment. I opened the door and saw the walls covered with pictures of me. Back then, I thought I was uncovering a mystery. But really, I was uncovering the kind of truth that destroys people from the inside out.